This is Strengths-Based Radio, promoting recovery and well-being through podcasts about mental health. Welcome back to Strengths-Based Radio series on Zen Buddhism and mindfulness. I'm Josh Kurz-Burchard. We are back for more on Zen and mindfulness with Peter Taylor. Peter is the author of Smell the Coffee and Wake Up and the blog zenmister.com. Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
Today we are going to talk about your essay, Refreshment, which is from your first chapter called Suffering. First, Peter, would you read the chapter for us?
Refreshment. Buddhism is refreshing because it talks about suffering. Suffering is important to talk about because if we don't talk about it, we just suffer silently. Sometimes when we suffer silently, we don't even realize we are suffering. We know we feel bad, but we expect ourselves to feel good, so we can't acknowledge our negative feelings. If we are silently suffering, unaware that we are suffering, and Buddha comes along and tells us that he notices our suffering, we are instantly refreshed. Our awareness is suddenly in tune with our feeling. That is refreshing. Another refreshing thing that the Buddha tells us is that everybody suffers. Suddenly we are not suffering alone. We are not deviant because we suffer. We are human in our suffering. As soon as we realize that we and everybody else suffers, then we can work with our suffering to find a way out. That is the most refreshing thing the Buddha tells us, that there is a way out of suffering. Buddhism begins with the idea that suffering is a part of our experience, that it has a cause and a cure. Recognizing suffering is the first step on the path. There are many opportunities for refreshment along the way.
Thank you for reading that chapter. What sorts of opportunities for refreshment are you referring to at the end of that chapter?
I think that when you're working with your suffering, you don't realize that life is a mix of joy and suffering. And the moments of joy and the moments of insight that you find through looking deeply into your suffering are all refreshing. So it's helpful to remember that life is not only suffering, that it's suffering with significant periods of relief along the way. So it gives you courage to look into your suffering and see what you have, knowing that you'll be refreshed for doing it.
And part of that refreshment can be in understanding that others know you are suffering and that they suffer too.
Yeah, it's helpful to know that everybody is suffering, that your own experience is not, it's not particular to you. It's particular to being a human. So for anybody who's aware of suffering, it's going to imagine that you suffer too, and they'll be able to see your suffering, whether you want them to or not. They just know that it's part of the human experience to suffer. So if you are aware of your suffering, then you're not so hard on yourself for suffering. You're gentle with yourself and you're kind to yourself, and you ease yourself through your suffering, and it changes the experience of suffering. So it's a worthwhile practice.
What about hiding your suffering? Is that something that is ever called for or important to do?
Yeah, it's part of our habits of suffering. We all hide our suffering. So again, if you're recognizing that you're hiding your suffering, if you're recognizing that you're suffering, and aware that you don't want other people to see your suffering, that's a personal boundary, and it's just a natural thing to do. And if you find that, that you're ashamed of your suffering, that's a whole different kind of suffering. So you want to look into that. Being aware of how you respond to your experience is all part of looking into your experience and transforming your experience.
Thank you. This offers insight to those who are suffering, which is all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Strengths-Based Radio. Join us on our website at strengthsbasedradio.org.